Before we bring out dessert, there's one more family matter to discuss. My mother said, as she lightly tapped her glass with a spoon. The conversations around the table faded. Every relative turned toward her. Then she smiled. Tessa and Jonah are getting divorced, she announced. And before her husband can take Grandma's house, she's agreed to transfer it to two members of this family. Dozens of eyes settled on me. My father's hand slid a large envelope across the table until it rested beside my dinner plate. Jonah's chair was empty. For a moment, I looked completely alone. Exactly as my parents had planned. What they didn't realize was that the envelope sitting beside my plate was the one thing I had been waiting for. 3 months earlier, my marriage wasn't over, it was simply hurting. Jonah and I had lost our baby in August. The grief didn't make us hate each other. It made us disappear into separate worlds. He buried himself in long shifts at the city garage. I escaped into endless property records at the title company where I worked. Eventually, we stopped arguing, not because we had solved anything, but because neither of us had enough strength left to fight. My parents watched the silence between us and assumed our marriage was falling apart. They couldn't have been more wrong. My grandmother, Estelle, had left her fully paid Victorian home to me before she passed away. Since my parents had cared for her during her final years, I allowed them to continue living there under a written occupancy agreement. The arrangement was simple. They could stay in the home for as long as they wished, but they had absolutely no authority to sell it, refinance it, borrow against it, or transfer ownership. Everything changed when my younger brother, Wade, decided he wanted to purchase a sports bar. Dad came to me with what he called a family opportunity. He wanted me to mortgage Grandma's house, so Wade could use the money as a down payment. I refused immediately. That house represented the only inheritance Grandma had ever left me. Before she died, she looked me in the eyes and made me promise never to risk it for someone else's financial plans. I intended to keep that promise. From that day forward, my mother's behavior changed. Instead of speaking to me, she began calling Jonah behind my back. One evening, he came into the kitchen looking uncomfortable. "Your mom called again," he said quietly. I looked up from the dishes. "What did she want this time?" He hesitated before answering. "She says you're controlling everything." I sighed. "Anything else?" He nodded. "She asked whether I'd try to claim half of Grandma's house if we ever divorced." I stared at him. "We're not getting divorced?" I told her exactly that. For a while, I convinced myself my mother was simply fishing for information. Then another strange incident happened. A week later, I came home from work and found a photographer measuring the front porch of Grandma's house. He was taking notes and checking camera angles. When I asked what he was doing, he answered casually, "Your father scheduled listing photographs." I immediately confronted Dad. Without missing a beat, he claimed the pictures were only for insurance purposes. His explanation sounded believable, until I noticed the paperwork in the photographer's hand. The work order listed the name of a real estate brokerage. That was the first time I realized something wasn't right. The second warning arrived a few days later, while I was working at the title company. One of our automated title alerts appeared. On my computer, someone had submitted a loan inquiry using Grandma's property as collateral. Curious, I opened the attached documents. What I found made my stomach tighten. There was a divorce petition. According to the paperwork, Jonah had already filed for divorce. Attached to it was a marital waiver supposedly signed by him, giving up any future claim to the property. At first glance, everything looked official. The signatures, the formatting, even the court stamp. But years of working with legal property records had trained my eyes to notice tiny details. One detail immediately stood out: the case number. It contained only 8 digits. Our county had switched to 10-digit case numbers more than 2 years earlier. Someone had copied an outdated format, and that single mistake exposed everything. I didn't call my parents. I didn't accuse anyone. Instead, I quietly requested a certified court docket search. The results arrived the following morning. There was no divorce case, no filing, no petition, nothing. Jonah later checked his credit report after I told him what I had found. It showed an identity verification attempt neither of us recognized. That night, we sat together at our kitchen table. For the first time in months, we stopped avoiding each other. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I never wanted to leave you," he said softly. "I just didn't know how to find my way back." I couldn't hold back my tears anymore, not because everything between us had suddenly been repaired, but because I finally understood something far more painful. While we were grieving the loss of our child, my own parents had been using our heartbreak as an opportunity. That conversation changed everything. For the first time since August, Jonah and I stopped pretending we were fine. Instead of sitting on opposite sides of our grief, we finally sat on the same side of the table. "I should have talked to you sooner," he admitted quietly. "I thought giving you space would make things easier." I reached across the table and took his hand. "And I thought you needed distance because you blamed me." Neither of us had spoken those fears aloud before. The silence that had almost destroyed our marriage suddenly felt smaller. Nothing was magically fixed that night. The pain was still there. The loss was still real. But we finally understood that someone else had been trying to turn our hardest season into an opportunity. From that point on, we prepared together. I made digital and paper copies of every suspicious document connected to the property. Each page was scanned, dated, and stored safely. Then I contacted the lender's fraud department. Within hours, an investigator called me back. She asked detailed questions about the loan application and requested copies of everything I had found. Next, I tracked down the notary, whose official seal appeared on the marital waiver. When she answered my call, she sounded confused. "I've never notarized anything for Jonah," she said immediately. I emailed her the document. Only minutes later, my phone rang again. "That isn't my signature," she explained firmly, "and although the seal looks like mine, someone copied it from another document." She paused before adding something even more troubling. "I recognize where they got it. Several months earlier, she had notarized paperwork for my father's construction company. Someone had duplicated her seal from those files." That discovery changed the entire investigation. The lender immediately froze the mortgage application. No money could be released. No loan could move forward. Before ending the call, the investigator gave us one important instruction. "Please don't confront anyone yet. We need to trace where the documents came from." Jonah and I agreed. If my parents believed everything was working, they would continue making mistakes, and every mistake would leave another piece of evidence behind. For nearly 2 weeks, we said nothing. My parents acted as though their plan was unfolding perfectly. Mom continued calling relatives. Dad talked openly about Wade's future business. Neither of them suspected the fraud investigation had already begun. Then, a few days before Christmas, Mom called. Her voice sounded cheerful. "We're having everyone over for Christmas dinner," she said warmly. "I really hope you come." I accepted without hesitation. The invitation wasn't a surprise, the timing was. Something told me they were getting ready for the final step. Christmas evening arrived. Only a few hours before dinner, Jonah received an emergency call from the city. Garage, a water main had burst near one of the maintenance buildings, and every available mechanic had been called in. "I'll get there as soon as I can," he promised while grabbing his jacket. I nodded. "I'll go ahead." When I arrived at my parents' house, everything looked perfectly normal. Christmas music filled the living room. The dining table was beautifully decorated. Relatives laughed as if nothing in the world was wrong. Mom greeted me with an unusually warm smile. "There you are." She led me to my seat. It wasn't beside Wade, it wasn't beside my aunt. She placed me alone at the very end of the table. I noticed immediately. Dad barely spoke during dinner. Instead, he watched everyone carefully, waiting. The meal ended. Dessert hadn't even been served. Then Dad slowly stood. He picked up his glass. The room became quiet. "I have one more family announcement," he said. Every conversation stopped. He reached into his briefcase and removed a thick envelope. Without saying another word, he slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of me. "Sign it tonight," he said calmly. "You've already failed at your marriage." His eyes locked onto mine. "Don't fail your family too." The room fell silent. One of my aunts covered her mouth. Across the table, Wade couldn't even look at me. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside were the documents I already knew existed. The fake divorce petition, the forged marital waiver, and a deed transferring Grandma Estelle's house into a trust controlled entirely by my parents. Mom leaned closer so only I could hear. "Jonah filed everything on Monday," she whispered. "He told us you're too emotional to deal with this anymore." I looked directly at her, then I asked one simple question. "Which courthouse?" For the first time that evening, Dad's confident smile faded. His voice became sharper. "Don't play games, Tessa." At that exact moment, the front door opened. Every head in the room turned. Jonah walked inside. Standing beside him was Celeste Park, the lender's fraud investigator. Right behind them was the notary whose official seal had been copied. My father's face turned completely white. He stood so fast that his chair crashed onto the floor behind him. No one spoke. The silence was louder than anything anyone could have said. The room fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one even reached for their coffee. My father remained standing beside his chair, his face drained of color. Jonah stepped forward first. Without saying a word, he placed a certified court search in the middle of the dining table. Then he looked directly at my parents. "I never filed for divorce," he said firmly. "There has never been a divorce petition." Every relative leaned forward. My mother tried to recover first. She forced a nervous smile. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "We only prepared those papers to protect Tessa." Before anyone could respond, Celeste Park opened the tablet she had been carrying. She calmly looked at my father. "If that's true," she asked, "why was the mortgage application submitted from Philip Vale's office computer?" The smile disappeared from Dad's face. Celeste continued, "And why was Lorna Vale's phone used to complete the identity verification process?" "No," one answered. My father finally pointed toward me. "She wanted us to help her." His voice sounded uncertain now. "She knew exactly what we were doing." That accusation became the final mistake they would make. Without raising my voice, I unlocked my phone. "I think everyone should hear this." I pressed play. My mother's voicemail filled the quiet dining room. Once Tessa signs, the lender releases the money. A few relatives exchanged stunned looks. "Wade gets the sports bar." My brother slowly lifted his head, then the final sentence echoed through the room. "And she'll never know we used the divorce papers." The recording ended. No one spoke. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Every excuse my parents had prepared disappeared in an instant. No one defended them. Not my aunt, not my cousins, not even Wade. I looked at my parents. My voice stayed calm. "You weren't trying to protect me. You put a price on my grief." Neither of them answered. There was nothing left to say. Within days, the lender officially referred the application for a fraud investigation. The copied notary seal generated a separate complaint. Investigators collected every document connected to the forged filing. The evidence spoke for itself. Wade contacted me a few days later. He sounded exhausted. "I backed out of buying the bar," he admitted. "Dad told me Grandma's house already belonged to them." He paused. "I didn't know how they planned to get it." I believed him. He had wanted the business. He hadn't known the cost. After speaking with my attorney, I made one final decision. I terminated my parents' occupancy agreement, not because I wanted revenge, because they had deliberately tried to place debt against property they had no legal right to control. Even then, I gave them 60 days to move out. People asked why I didn't remove them immediately. The answer was simple. I wanted my decision to reflect my character, not theirs. Over the next 2 months, they packed their belongings and rented a small house across town. There were no dramatic confrontations, no final arguments, only quiet consequences. Most of our relatives stopped believing their version of events after reading the official records themselves. Facts have a way of surviving long after rumors disappear. That spring, Jonah and I finally moved into Grandma Estelle's Victorian house. For the first time in months, the home felt peaceful again. We also made another decision. We started counseling. Neither of us wanted to pretend our loss had never happened. Healing wasn't something either of us could accomplish alone. Week after week, conversation after conversation, we slowly found each other again. One Saturday morning, we stood together in the front yard. Grandma's old rose bushes had completely died. Instead of replacing them with more roses, we planted a young magnolia tree. Jonah smiled as he covered the roots with fresh soil. "I think she'd like this." I smiled back. "I think so too." The tree became our reminder that new life doesn't erase old pain. It simply grows beside it. As the months passed, life became quieter, not because everything was perfect, but because honesty had finally replaced fear. Looking back now, I realize Christmas used to mean something very different to me. Every year felt like another chance to prove I deserved a place at my parents' table, to earn approval that always seemed just out of reach. But that Christmas changed everything. It taught me a lesson Grandma had understood long before I did. Family isn't the people who announce your future without your permission. Family is the person who stands beside you while you take your life back. Jonah never left. He reached for my hand when everything else was falling apart. And together, we reclaimed far more than a house. We reclaimed each other.